thank you all for coming to our Book News Live. I want to introduce the Book News troupe. We have Matthew, Jake, Shira, and I'm Sara. And we are adult services librarians, and Matthew is also our tech aficionado. So, forgot your real title. What's your title?
Adult Services and Technology Library.
That's it. Okay, yeah. So, anyway, I've divided the books into theme sections. People like that, and I'm gonna let the first book take it away. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. My first selection is The Borrowed Hills by Scott Preston. This debut novel follows sheep farmers in the rural north of England who enter a life of crime following the destruction of their flocks. You might remember the foot and mouth disease outbreak that ravaged Great Britain back in 2001. The region of Cumbria, near the Scottish border, was especially hard hit. That historical livestock disease outbreak forms the basis for The Borrowed Hills. Steve Elliman is one of the Cumbrian farmers whose flock was culled by authorities after the virus turns up on his family farm. Lacking direction and purpose without his flock, he starts spending time with William Hearn, a neighboring farmer whose flock was similarly destroyed. That also means spending time with Helen, William's independent wife and Steve's former teenage crush. William devises a plan to strike back at the elites who ruined his livelihood. He's going to steal truckloads of prize-winning heirloom sheep from a touristy organic farm down south. He enlists the help of Steve and Colin Tinley, a poacher and small-time crook. The plan goes off successfully, but like any good heist, it invites more trouble. Colin and his thuggish accomplices show up at William's farm seeking more work. And as William's plans grow more brazen, and as Colin becomes more unpredictable, Steve finds himself fighting for his life amid the fells and the dales. Don't let the 21st century setting with its quaint villages and rolling green hills fool you. The Borrowed Hills is a Western through and through. Forces of authority and forces of criminality converge in tiny remote towns. Desperate people find their options narrowing until the only remaining options are the bad kind. Livestock rustling is a major plot point. And of course, there are guns. The only difference between an English Western and an American Western is that in England, the lawmen aren't armed. Even the writing is a reflection of the setting. British farmers have a reputation for being a taciturn lot, and Scott Preston, a native of the region, writes in the same way with sparse yet effective prose. He even throws in some local slang. You might need to look up what words like out and nout mean, or you can just try to use context clues and figure it out for yourself. But the writing really comes alive with descriptions of the land. The mountains, bogs, coasts, and fields, they're all painted in a way that'll have you yearning for the north of England. The Borrowed Hills is a hard-hitting literary thriller from a promising new voice. If you like westerns, thrillers, or rural noirs, check it out. If you like All Creatures Great and Small, but think it could do with some more crime and violence, check it out too. This book came out in June and is available from the Glencoe Library.
The first book I chose is Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. How many have read Elizabeth Strout before? Yeah, almost everyone, sure. Well, in this book, almost all of the characters in her previous books converge into the town. And if you've read any of the others, it feels really good, like old home week, for them to come back to Crosby, Maine. Elizabeth Strout has a devoted fan base of those who follow her world of interconnected stories of ordinary people from Crosby, Maine. In Tell Me Everything, she brings back many of her beloved characters from her earlier books, Lucy Barton, the Burgess brothers, and Olive Kittredge, along with many of the side characters, into one seemingly final novel. And in an interview, she did state that this is her final novel, although she's never going to kill Olive Kitteridge, who is 90 in this novel, and yeah, right, and she's living in a retirement home, and her next door neighbor in this retirement home is Isabel, right, from Amy and Isabel. So, yeah, and the book details it's hard to summarize this book. It's very much about friendship and the interconnectedness of people, also people's isolation and how you never truly know someone else, such as a friend or an intimate partner. And in this book, she looks at a couple marriages in particular. Bob Burgess is almost a central character in this, as well as Lucy Barton. Lucy is living with her ex-husband William. If you remember from the last couple books, they were escaping the pandemic, and they were living in Manhattan, and they had divorced. And he suggests that Lucy come to Maine with him. So they're now living together, and they continue living together. But Bob Burgess has these very meaningful walks with her every single day. And that friendship is becoming deeper, and you sort of wonder, will they, won't they, what's going to happen? So there's a little bit of that romantic element. And Olive Kitteridge, from her retirement home, asked Bob to invite Lucy, who she knows is a writer, to come, because she has stories to tell her. So this is part of the main theme of Tell Me Everything. Everybody's got a story. And as the author and one of the characters points out, these are unrecorded lives. And they may not be, famous people, but everyone has an important story to tell. Everyone has a history. And the book also deals with the choices we've made in the past and regrets when you're in your 60s, and how one might have done things differently. There's also a murder investigation, so she throws this, but it's not a murder she wrote kind of book. That's almost, the murder isn't that significant, believe it or not. They find a body in the quarry of a woman. I mean, it's a little dramatic, and yet what takes precedence is the relationships of the people and how everyone wants to be heard. One of the characters, the victim's reclusive artist son, who lives with her, is suspected of the murder. And I know, right? And Bob Burgess, because he's an attorney, he decides to take the case. And everyone, Bob Burgess really supports the underdog, and he's just this really kind man. And he's a retired attorney, but he decides to take this case anyway. So that becomes a large part of the story. A major theme of this book, and one from which the title derives, is that of telling stories and truly listening. Lucy Barton, the writer we met in 3 previous books, tells 90-year-old Olive stories, and Olive tells her stories. Bob Burgess and Lucy, both great listeners. That's their biggest strength. Share secrets on their daily walks. Their growing intimacy stems from each really hearing the other. And in this book we meet in more detail Bob's minister wife, Margaret, who, yeah, right, who appeared, it's Old Home Week, right. And she's very self-centered, and she doesn't really hear Bob, even though she's a minister. She's involved with her own world, and that's one of the reasons you can see he's having a very close attachment with Lucy. And you kind of wonder, why is Lucy with her ex-husband? But, love is unexplained. Tell Me Everything does come with trigger warnings. There is mention of traumatic childhood. Bob Burgess has had a traumatic childhood, if you remember from the other books. And Lucy, very traumatic, right? Extreme poverty, bad relationship with her mother. That's another thing the two probably are drawn to each other. Bob's father has died, and he died because Bob thinks that he was driving this car as a kid. He was just 7 years old? Simeon, or something, really young, and he thinks he killed his father, and he didn't. But that's okay. You learn that pretty. So it's very complicated inner lives that these characters have, and they all come together. Strout refrains from calling anyone evil, because as I was reading it, I really felt that some of these people were really bad in terms of the way they treated their children. But Strout, she has a very optimistic view of the world, and she through another character says, I think through Lucy, that these characters are just broken, and then that chain continues on in generations. So it also deals with generational trauma, but it's not a dark book, and yeah, I recommend it. Yeah, totally. Thank you. Now we're into our historical fiction section, which I know everybody loves. I'm going to open with Familiaris by David Wroblewski. This is one of Oprah's recent picks, and that's how I heard about it, because I did not read the earlier book, The Story of Edgar Sawtelle. And anyway, David Wroblewski is a native Wisconsin man. So, Charlie, it's your town, right? Yeah, he in the rural part of Wisconsin, but he grew up there, and his characters center around this farm, which was indeed the farm he knew. And his parents, for a brief period of time, raised dogs. But then he came from a very poor home, and they felt they weren't able to do the kind of work with these dogs that they deemed necessary. So from that, the story derived. For those who read The Story of Edgar Sawtelle, published in 2008, this book is a prequel to Wroblewski's first work. Both books were selected as Oprah Book Club picks. In various interviews, the author mentions that while he was writing Edgar, this character of Edgar's grandfather kept showing up in his imagination and had a voice. And when the character indicated that he was born with an extra share of whimsy, Wroblewski was intrigued. John Sawtelle would indeed get his own book. How do you sum up a book that is just short of 1,000 pages long, with sections that have been novels in themselves, that could have been novels in themselves? Simply by remembering that first and foremost, this is a love story spanning over 40 years. The book begins in 1919, and the characters we first meet are John and Mary Sheftall before they were married. Mary is principled and independent-minded, a woman who speaks her mind and takes no guff. John is an idealistic young man of 22 who works at the Kissel Automotive Factory. Excuse me. And he, let me get a drink, sorry. And that really was an automotive company, because I looked it up, and a lot of the events that happen, like the head of that company does get shot in real life, and that happens in this book as well. So his job is to test the cars, and that has a little humor in it because John wants to perfect everything. And he's always telling management that how they can do things better, how they can save time, and they're not interested. It gets to a point that he loses his job, which doesn't really upset him for very long. While on a trip to pick up a puppy, John stumbles upon an abandoned farmhouse and resolves to purchase it. He can't rehab it himself, so he asks two childhood friends, Frank and Elbow, to join him. Mary is nothing but supportive and, unbeknownst to John, renegotiates the deal, blackmails her abuser, and provides the means for John to purchase the property. She's quite a woman, especially for that time period.
Yeah.
Familiaris is also a story about friendship. This is a friendship among flawed people. Sojak is his name. He's a horse thief, but for all the best reasons. Elbow rarely speaks, but possesses a great talent, one that has an important role at the end of the book. Frank, a World War I veteran who has lost a leg and an arm in battle, and who wants nothing more than to die. He agrees to go to the farm only in the hope of seeing John, ever positive and naive, fail. John's tenacity and Frank's recovery is both a testament to his friendship as well as to who John is. John is such an admirable person. He's just wonderful. I think that's, and so is Mary, and I think seeing these two individuals kept me going in this book. It's so worth 1,000 pages. I kept looking forward to returning to the book every day. There's also a mystical element in the book, substantiated by the character of Ida Payne. She plays a role in both Familiaris as well as the story of Edgar Sheftall, and is integral to the part and the magic in the book. Interwoven throughout the book is the human-animal bond. There is Sojak's draft horse, Granddaddy, who Sojak insists can understand human troubles. Of course, Sojak needs to be there to preside over and interpret the therapy sessions, which form a side business for him. A bit of a scam, sure, but it seems to help the people who are talking to the horse. The dog-human relationship is central to Familiaris. The very title is from the Latin term Canis familiaris, the scientific term for the domestic dog. The Sheftall dogs are not bred for looks, but for a unique ability to understand their human owners. As I mentioned to begin with, Wroblewski grew up on a farm in northern Wisconsin. He uses that very farm as a setting for Familiaris. The structure of the book, though, is based on a journey motif. John's life is divided into 5 quests spanning 40 years. A pivotal line early in the book is when John asks his friends, Elbow and Frank, to come with him to this dilapidated farm, the first of 5 quests. Suppose you could do one impossible thing. This line becomes the major theme of the book. What I loved about this book most were its amazing characters. The reader is fully invested in every one of them, in spite of, or maybe because they are all flawed. There is also the sense that this is a magical Western in which the bad guys, particularly those who hurt animals, get their just ends. If you are a fan of historical fiction or family sagas, this book is for you. I'm so taken with it that I'm now reading Wroblewski's first novel, The Story of Edgar Sawtelle, which is a mere... Yeah, right? No, it's only about 600 pages, so it's a shorter book. It does seem darker. I'm about 150 pages into it, and it takes the Hamlet story, the Shakespearean story, and the brother who you read in Familiaris, Claude, is a really bad egg. Yeah. And you know what I read in Familiaris, what I gleaned is breeding plays a big part, and you know they didn't know much about breeding animals, breeding dogs for qualities in the 20s, even 30s, and John seems ahead of his time. But the fact that he has these two children, boys, who are radically different, grew up in the same home, and you know the question of genetics versus nurture really comes through as a sidebar in this novel. So again, I highly recommend it. Loved it.
It doesn't matter which order if you haven't read either.
No, because I did not read the first book, and so now reading The Story of Edgar Sawtelle, I really know in depth that backstory about John Sawtelle's grandfather, who is Edgar Sawtelle's grandfather, who is John Sawtelle, and his grandmother, and his uncle, Frank. I'm sorry, not Frank, Claude. Yeah. And even some of the earlier dogs are, and the dogs are not, they don't talk. I mean, it's not a silly book in any way. The first book is really about the people and about the interrelationships of the people and the small town, and there's a lot of history in this book too. World War I comes into it, and it's really a wonderful, wonderful story. Pardon? Well, yeah, right? You can, but you won't want to put it down, though.
I read the first one.
You did?
Yeah.
I would recommend this one, too, sure. In fact, the author did say in an interview he'd be curious for those who did not read the first book, who read the second one first, what their take on it. And for the first time in my life, I might actually write to him because I was so taken with this book. So, thank you.
Okay, so continuing with historical fiction. Everybody can hear me well? Yes? Okay. So this one is The Glassmaker by Tracy Chevalier. Some of you might have read it or heard about it. It's the latest by her. Very prominent, famous author of historical fiction. So this one was released past June, and it's set on the island of Murano, Italy, which is beautiful. If you haven't been, you should definitely visit. I've been there. And it's about half-hour boat ride away from Venice nowadays. Not sure what it was back in the day then. But the novel is spanning Renaissance era Italy to present day. And the beginning is set in 1486. It describes Venice as a trade hub and then later as a center for tourists. Ursula is the main character of this author, and she's the eldest daughter of the Rosso family. And this is a family of glassmakers. And this book focuses on the women side of glassmaking, because glassmaking was always known as a male profession, especially back then. Her father actually dies in the beginning, so it's not a spoiler. So he dies from a glassmaking accident. And so the family is left without the main glassmaker, which is a maestro. And now they have to figure out how to make ends meet. And she has her brothers, so now they're responsible for the business. And then she takes care of a lot of things in the house with her mom, is the eldest daughter. She's 17-year-old. And she's only 17, and she's basically responsible for raising her other siblings, and she's expected to take care of them. And she decides to learn the art of bead making, which was some women back then still started this craft. And so she decided to learn it from Maria Borovia, which is actually a real glassmaker. And so some of the characters in the story are kind of borrowed from reality. And she's a very strong-minded woman, and she teaches her the art of bead making from glass. And it's very complicated at first, because glass, of course, when it's melting, it just goes everywhere, and she has to figure that out. So between all the house chores, Ursula sneaks out of all her other duties and to create these glass beads. And she just, long nights, she barely sleeps, and she just tries to get better and better with it. Once she gets a little better, she decides to sell them to a famous merchant that works with the glassmaking family. And she needs a lot of practice at first, but then he starts to recognize her talent way before a family recognizes her talent. And so he starts buying it from her, and even right off the bat, they bargain. And she actually drives a pretty hard bargain, even as a teenager. So she becomes pretty good at it. And her mom is a very good role model for her, because she's very assertive, so that helps her with the business. And her brother, in the beginning, is so condescending that he calls her glass beads rabbit droppings. So it's really very condescending. And so after a while, he starts to recognize her talent, but it takes a long time. And then she doesn't need to sneak out. She just, okay, I need to do my glass beads. And she goes and works on this job. And she earns money from that. And she brings it to the household. And then they make ends meet during that time, which is pretty tough time as well. And this is a way she also expresses herself. It's not just a job. It's something that she becomes very passionate about. One day, of course, there got to be some romance in here. So one day she meets Antonio, and this man is close to her age, and is from a fisherman family. So actually, glassmakers never married other families. It was always had to be people who are glassmakers, because the craft was so secret, and the techniques, that they couldn't marry people from other types of families. And so she kept it like a secret, like talking to him, and he was a beginner glassmaker himself, so he recognized her talent as well. Also way before her family did. And at first she was pretty reluctant to respond to his advances, because she knew that there wouldn't be any future for the romance. And so she just kept doing her work and her work at the house. And as the plot progresses, he tries to convince her otherwise. So this author, she definitely did a lot of research. She actually took so many trips to Venice, which she loves. And then of course, it's a beautiful place, so much history. And so she learned how to make beads herself. Maybe not professional, but she tried it. And she took a few glassmaking classes to really learn it. And there are so many books about Venice, but this one just really takes you back because the time span takes place 500 years, which doesn't make sense in terms of like regular human lifespan, but it takes you throughout the plague, the Age of Enlightenment, the Great War, COVID, and the rising sea levels and the floods that we see nowadays. So, and there are even real life people in there. So we have Napoleon and his wife Josephine, and even Casanova has a role in there. And so the Glassmaker, I thought it was very captivating. I listened to the audiobook, so that's another way you can, which was good. And then if you have not visited Murano, of course, this is like a magical island to see. It's small, but there's a lot to see there. And just the glassmaking, watching the glassmaking made is just beautiful. And that's part of the reason I picked that book. And I hope you would like that one. You can see the cover is even, looks a little bit like glass.
Well, we're going now. Pardon?
I said hello again.
Yeah, we're going now from Italy to Iran. Yeah. The Lion Women of Tehran is the book that I did. Of all the friends we acquire over a lifetime, those from our childhood have a special place in our hearts. Such is the case for Ellie and Homa in 1950s Iran. Ellie comes from an upper-class family and lives in a beautiful house. That is, until the untimely death of her father. Her uncle refuses to support them in this grand style, and they are forced to move to a small apartment downtown. So at the age of 7, Ellie has to go to a new school, make new friends, and deal with her mother's many grievances. Chief among these being that she is descended from royalty, and look how far she has sunk. The mother is quite a character. and from early on you can see the push-pull, even when she's 7 years old, of the mother-daughter relationship here. Ellie, being 7, makes friends in this elementary school that has, more middle class and lower class children. She was previously at a private school. And she meets Homa, who's vivacious and outgoing and optimistic and a mischief maker. And she gets Ellie into all kinds of adventures, like going to a food bazaar and cutting class. And the recipes that are in this book are mouth-watering. Yeah. So in contrast to Ellie's home life, which is very stark and not happy, Homa's home life, she comes from a very loving family, middle class. The mother, she always wants to go to her friend Homa's home. And the mother, they do cooking with the mother. Again, you have description of mouth-watering dishes. Homa's father, though, is a communist, and we're dealing with here the 50s and the 60s, and he is against the rule of the Shah. And he is subversive in that regard. He belongs to different resistance groups, etc. Whereas, of course, Ellie's mother and uncle support the Shah because they're upper class. This book is historical fiction at its best. It begins in the 50s when the Shah's in power. It takes us through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. And then another time period I'm not going to reveal because it's a spoiler. But in the early 60s, the Shah implemented what is known as the White Revolution. It was a series of reforms. For the purposes of this book, Kamali, the author, is just interested in those laws that impacted women, such as family and reproductive rights. Within these, the marriage age was raised, and inheritance laws became more favorable to women, as did divorce and child custody laws. Incredible gains were made by women during this period, and those very rights were lost in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution took place and the Shah was banished, and the Ayatollah Khomeini came to power. This is when the hijab was mandated by law and enforced through imprisonment and fines and arrests. And just 2 years ago, you had that young girl who was arrested and she died in captivity by the police, which led to all of these protests, women's protests. And then it quiets down, and in an author interview, Marjan Kamali mentions that's been the trend since that. There resistance movements, and then they're quelled down, and then they come up. The book was meaningful on many levels to me. The Iranian Revolution happened in my time, and I remember it. The University of Illinois, where I was an undergraduate and got my first master's degree, they had a lot of several programs with the University of Tehran. And the library school in particular had a group of students who went over there and professors. And then they had to be rescued. But they had to go to the American embassy because the revolution happened when they were there and they couldn't get out. So they had to go to the embassy, and it was a whole deal. On a more personal level, I had a wonderful childhood friend who I knew from grammar school through college. And like the main character, her father got into some trouble, and this girl ended up dropping out, and I lost touch with her. Kind of reconnected when, I would say 20 years later, she was walking on the beach and I was walking, and we met. And it was just, and she had always wanted to become a doctor, and she did ultimately become a doctor. And that, and although we lost touch and didn't reconnect after that, the time we had together really meant a lot to me, and I still think about it very warmly, as I'm sure others in this audience have had with a childhood friend. So on both of those levels, this book, spoke to me. The characters are wonderful, and so if you're looking for a great tale, well told, with some history that you'll remember, and especially now Iran is so much in the news, I truly recommend it.
Hello, I'm Matthew, and my first choice is Drafted by Rick Parker. The year is 1966. The Beatles are on their final tour, the space race is in full swing, and the war in Vietnam is escalating more and more by the day. In this ferment, Rick Parker, the shy, insecure, sheltered kid from Savannah, Georgia, is drafted into the United States Army. Now, almost 60 years later, Parker, an accomplished cartoonist whose work has been featured in the New York Times, worked for a long time at Marvel, recounts his time as an involuntary member of the armed forces in this semi-fictionalized graphic novel, Drafted. Like many young men of his generation, with no college prospects, no medical deferments to attain, and no rich parents to fall back on, Parker is drafted and quickly finds himself uniquely ill-suited to the rigors of military life. Drafted proceeds at an elliptical, kind of episodic pace. You see military hazing rituals at their most absurd and most brutal. Long stretches of boredom and tedious manual labor, punctuated by terrifying encounters with drill sergeants, and a haunting episode where Parker is put through a simulation of what life in a POW camp might be like. Through all this hangs Parker's looming fear of deployment to Vietnam, a country he knows nothing about, on behalf of a cause about which he knows even less. As part of his stateside duties, Parker took part in the coming home ceremonies for the bodies of troops killed in Vietnam, and you often see him wonder if a similar fate awaits him in the future. It is in art and drawing that Parker is able to maintain his sanity and peace of mind. And Drafted is as much a portrait of a young artist discovering their craft as it is a standard military memoir. Sneaking in late-night drawing sessions on the covers of his bunk, shirking latrine duty to practice drawing Spider-Man. Drafted's drawn in kind of a zany style, kind of a cross between Mad Magazine and Harvey Picar's American Splendor series that goes easy on the eyes. Parker is a breezy, irreverent narrator of his own story, and Drafted is a breezy and irreverent look at life in the military you did not ask for, but got anyway. If you're a fan of graphic novels, read it. If you've never read a graphic novel in your life, Drafted is a perfect place to start. Drafted is available soon at the Glencoe Public Library. Thank you. Yes?
Is this his first graphic novel?
No, he's been like a cartoonist for a bit. He's written, he actually drew, if you ever watched the Beavis and Butthead show in the 90s, he drew the kind of tie-in comic for that. I think this is his first kind of long kind of graphic novel kind of in a collected format. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm back again. So now we have a sharp transition to romance. So this one, you probably heard about it, or you've seen the cover, because the cover, you just can't ignore it because of all the colors. The Rom-Commers by Katherine Center. She's pretty much the queen of comfort reads. So she writes in a way that just warm and fuzzy, but she does have a lot of realistic struggles that the characters are going through. So this one was released this past June, and it's another great read by her. It involves some enemies to lovers tropes and also forced proximity tropes. So Kate Center, she has a talent for love stories. And like the title, this book has some funny moments, but it also deals with serious topics, such as loss and illness. And there is a good dose of sister dynamics, because she has a younger sister. So Emma Wheeler, she's the main character of this novel, and she always dreamt of writing screenplays. And she won contests for this, but not national fame, just she wrote, and she writes well, but for the time being, her writing is on hold. She is very dedicated to her family. Her dad experienced a hiking accident. She requires day-to-day caretaking. And in that same accident, and it's not a spoiler too, because it happens very in the beginning of the book, so her mom dies in that same accident. So Emma assumed the role of the responsible adult in the house. So she's responsible for her sister, and she just takes everything on her shoulder. So one day, her agent Logan, who also happens to be her ex and her best friend, he tells her that the famous screenwriter Charlie Yates would like to hire her to rewrite his screenplay. And this is the gig that could change her career. And that's what she's been waiting for. So the rewrite is supposed to last for 6 weeks, but it's in California. So she would have to fly over there. And she would need to step back and let her younger sister to be in charge of the house and taking care of her father. And she's not used to giving that much control and trust into her younger sister. So she would have to do that. With encouragement from her family that nudge her to go, to not miss this opportunity. and full of guilt for leaving her father behind, she flies to LA. Once she lands, it looks like the whole gig has been a big misunderstanding. Apparently, Charlie never agreed to work with anyone on his rom-com script. So he's known for sci-fi and thrillers, and this is just a way for him to get another script approved. So this is basically another project he's working on, but he doesn't really care about that or how it turns out. So he just wants to submit it. And he doesn't want to take the time to rewrite it. But Emma, she does not give up. She believes in rom-com, she believes in love, and she wants to prove to Charlie that rom-coms and love matters. So Emma, she rips Charlie's screenplay apart and gives him pointers about how rom-coms are supposed to be written. So she points out all the weak points, and there are many, because he's not used to writing rom-coms and it's just not good. So Emma is not the woman Charlie usually falls for. And besides, she has messy, curly red hair, as you can see in the photo here. You cannot see what he likes about her, but there is something there. She's the type of person who never puts herself first. And so this is for the first time in her life that she decides to focus on her career and just give it a try. So they spend a lot of time together rewriting the script. That's after convincing Charlie. He actually looked over some of her work. He was very impressed, and he decided to give it a try. But he wasn't fully in. He was still very doesn't believe in love and not really into rewriting it. But they still spend a lot of time together, and once they look past their differences, they both find they're not so different after all. And they both had some painful past that they had to deal with, which you will discover when you read it. So would this love story come true, or are they just confusing fiction and reality? So yeah, I enjoyed this one, and I hope you would too. And I'm up again. So the next book is continuing with romance, before we go to the next genre. This one is Winter in New York by Josie Silver. If you read any of the books by her, she also has books that you read them and you just feel good books, but also has substance and real struggles that the characters are dealing with. As you can see, it's winter, so not winter here yet, but if you missed it last winter, then it would be a good one to pick up. And so if you're looking for like a winter holiday setting, maybe a little bit later in the year, and the main character is Iris Raven. She's a 30-something-year-old trained chef who is originally from London. After she loses her mother to cancer, she gathers the courage to leave an abusive relationship and move to New York. So she hopes to start new and to just go to New York. And why did she pick New York? It's because it's her mom's favorite place. And even though she came back to London, like she used to be in a band, and she spent a lot of time in New York. So she hopes she will like it just the way she did, and to find that connection after she passed. So she starts this new chapter in her life, basically starts from scratch, and she starts working in a noodle shop. And one of the main reasons she takes this job is because it comes with an apartment. So she can work in the noodle shop downstairs and then live in an apartment upstairs. And so this is kind of worked out, especially because she's starting from the beginning. And the boss of this shop, his name is Bobby. And he has a husband, Robin, and there is the building cat that's also of course, there, in and out. And Bobby becomes one of her best friends. So he becomes also very protective of her because he knows, doesn't know everything about her past, but he knows some things that she shared with him. This job, unfortunately, doesn't allow her creativity to shine because she was a chef, so she tried like numerous dishes in the past. And this one, it's a simple noodle shop. It's not a Michelin restaurant. So one day she goes to Little Italy, and she sees a little gelateria. Now it looks like a family-run gelateria, and she looks at the sign, and she says, "Oh, it looks like my mom's photo." So her mom's kept in her scrapbook. She kept a few photos, and that was one of them. But she doesn't really know why, so she walks in there, and then she talks to Gio, which is short for Giovanni, and he's one of the people that work at the shop. And he's, so they're not serving ice cream. So she asks, why are you not serving ice cream? So the family recipe is gone now because the only person that knows the recipe is Santos, is in the hospital, and he can't remember it. So Iris, she tastes just a little sample that they froze, and she's like, this is definitely the gelato that I had when I grew up with my mom. So apparently her mom used to make that exactly same gelato. But she doesn't tell Gio that she knows the recipe. So she just says, oh, I'll help you out. She pretends to recreate it from scratch. And then, of course, they recreate the gelato, and then they can start serving it. In the meantime, until they figure it out, they serve coffee and other things. So this is, we don't really know, at that point, when would their secret turn up, and how would Gio react to it? But Santos used to be her mom's, used to go out with her mom back in the day when she was in New York. Her mom's name is Vivian. So they go back and forth between this dual timeline, between Vivian and Santos, and Iris and Gio. So present day, and then back when her mom was in New York. So her mom was a musician, and they were in the same band. So, Santos wasn't in the band, but she wanted to be a musician, and she met him while she was in New York. So they recreated, and they start serving it, and on the way she gets to meet this large family. So it's Italian-American family, and she never had a large family before. And so slowly she pretty much falls for him and for his large family, because all of a sudden, his sisters, and they're very close. And so her lie becomes just like a snowball, which fits that theme here. And at this point, we don't really know, is she going to tell him the truth or not? What's going to happen? So I really like the way that the side characters are done as well, because Bobby is they're very close, the boss of the noodle shop, and he's also, I guess, happens to be our landlord because she lives in that apartment. But Iris herself is not the most likable character, of course, because she has this lie that kind of stretches throughout the plot. So that's something I would say was a little frustrating, because when you read it, you just want her to tell him the truth and then keep going. So it does have a lot of movie references set in New York, and that's what you would find with your flyer. So we printed it out for you so you can check it out. But personally, I really like another book by Josie Silver. I think it was done a little better. It was called One Day in December. And this one is about misconnection. So it's somebody that, and love from first sight. So this one, I I enjoyed it, but I do think that the other one was done better.
Transitioning to a pair of thrillers now. This is The Hitchcock Hotel by Stephanie Wrobel. As big of an Alfred Hitchcock fan as I am, I have absolutely nothing on the protagonist of this novel, Alfred Smedall. Named after the master of suspense himself by his devotee parents, Smedall has made the director's work his life's work, turning an old Victorian mansion in rural New England into a Hitchcock-themed hotel, where guests can rest and dine surrounded by recreations of rooms and moments from films such as Psycho or North by Northwest. Hitchcock posters dot the wall. There's a 24-hour screening room where the director's masterpieces are always playing, and there's even a massive aviary for all you fans of the birds out there. To celebrate the hotel's 1-year anniversary, Alfred invites 5 of his college friends, whom he has not spoken to in 16 years, to the hotel. Back in the day, they formed their own Hitchcock fan club, but for reasons you'll learn once you read the book, they slowly drifted apart over the years. There's Julius, the trust fund heir to a fashion fortune, Zoe, the hard-charging top chef of a fine dining establishment, TJ, a former nerd turned fitness enthusiast and bodyguard, Samria, the startup founder and new mother, and Grace, C-suite master of the universe. The guest's trepidation at picking up the threads of relationships that have lied dormant for almost 2 decades are confirmed almost immediately as the group descends into petty squabbles. And there's just something not quite right with Alfred. And that's all before a dead body shows up in the lobby, at which point the Hitchcock Hotel turns into a deliciously twisted, locked room mystery. Fans of Alfred Hitchcock will delight in all the Easter eggs strewn throughout the story by Wrobel, and mystery fans will find this a compelling yarn to keep them warm as the weather turns cold. And if you've seen Hitchcock films, not only are there kind of like small kind of Easter egg and references, the way the kind of plot unfolds is sort of reminiscent of several different types of Hitchcock films. So whether you've seen a bunch of Alfred Hitchcock films, never seen it all, I highly recommend this mystery, which you can get now from the Glencoe Library. Thank you.
My next selection is I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom by Jason Pargin. Now that you've heard the title, you want to know what it's about. This satirical novel is a pre-apocalyptic road trip through a land of irrationality in an age of anxiety. The place is the United States of America. The time is any day now. 20-something Abbott Coburn is a walking ball of anxiety. When he's not worrying about things that will happen, things that may happen, or things that have already happened, he streams himself playing video games and occasionally drives his father's SUV for Lyft. One morning, his fare is a young woman in a Circle K parking lot sitting on a large black box, the kind that musicians haul their gear in. She introduces herself as Ether and offers Abbott $200,000 cash to drive her in the box from the exurbs of Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. There are some stipulations, of course. He can't bring his phone with them. He can't look inside the box, and they have to leave right now. Against all better judgment, Abbott agrees. As they cross the country, Ether's free spirit helps Abbott get out of his comfort zone. But when he was back at home, dropping off his phone and grabbing a change of clothes, he left a video message for his followers. That video becomes the first piece in a massive conspiracy. It's only a matter of hours before a federal agent, a tattooed biker, Abbott's dad, and even the internet at large are trying to hunt down Abbott, Ether, and their cargo. Thousands of anonymous online strangers are convinced that Ether is a Russian asset and that the box contains anything from a dirty bomb to an alien corpse. And the 2 misfit road trippers have no idea they're at the center of a nationwide vigilante manhunt. I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom is the kind of book that I just had to keep on reading. Despite having a lot of characters and a lot of places doing a lot of things, it never feels bogged down. And when all the pursuing parties finally catch up with each other, comic mayhem ensues. But it's not all fun and games. Jason Pargin does have some important warnings about loneliness, extremism, and the dehumanizing effects of social media. But there are flickers of hope amid all the doomerism. We do see how, despite all the craziness it causes, the internet does have the power to form genuine friendships and allow groups of people to accomplish what no individual can. And as Ether's Iconoclastic Conversations point out, we may be living through interesting times, but that doesn't mean it's not a great time to be alive. What I really liked about this book is that it reminded me of one of my favorite movies, Repo Man, a 1980s cult classic about various factions trying to hunt down a Chevy Nova with an alien corpse in the trunk. This book feels like if Repo Man were updated for the social media age with all of the zany chaos and punk rock energy intact. If you want a book that has to be read to be believed, take a peek inside this black box. It came out last month and is available from the Glencoe Library.
All right, we'll be ending with a pair of nonfiction books. My last choice is Hiroshima, The Last Witnesses by M.G. Sheftall. Next year will mark the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and with each passing year, the number of living survivors of one of the most seminal events of the 20th century grows smaller and smaller. One day, very soon, the bombings will pass from living to memory to something exclusively belonging to the realm of history. Before that happens, however, author M.G. Sheftall, a scholar of Japanese history, has collected remembrances from the last living survivors of August 6, 1945 in his new book. These survivors, known as hibakusha in Japan, now all in their 90s, were almost exclusively children or teenagers when the bomb dropped on that clear August day. They were students in streetcars on their way to classes, children helping their parents with breakfast, teenagers conscripted into demolition duty, bringing down buildings to stop the inferno from the anticipated firebombing that had not yet affected Hiroshima. Their testimonies of the destruction on that day are delivered in clear, direct prose that gives an unvarnished, frequently disturbing picture of the effects of nuclear warfare. Sheftall also includes the voices of many of the forgotten victims and survivors of Hiroshima, such as the thousands of Korean and Chinese forced laborers in Hiroshima, who have often been erased from official and popular narratives on both sides of the Pacific. These testimonies are not simply confined to August 6, as readers will learn about the decades of challenges faced by hibakusha, including bombing-related illnesses and the long fight by survivors' organizations and activists to get official recognition and restitution from a Japanese government that long denied that it had any sort of obligations to them. Alongside these direct accounts, Sheftall also details the context for August 6, from the development of the bomb and the Manhattan Project, the history of the Pacific War, the long-standing, ongoing debate about the necessity and morality of the bombing, and the post-Hiroshima history of nuclear proliferation, nuclear arms talks, and anti-nuclear activism, at which many hibakusha have been at the center of. Taken together, Hiroshima, The Last Living Witnesses, constitutes one of the most wide-ranging and informative oral histories the bombings ever produced. It's the first of a 2-volume series Sheftall is working on. The second volume on Nagasaki will be coming out in the coming years. It is available now from the Glencoe Public Library, and I highly, highly recommend it. It's definitely one of the best books I've read, just on the bombings and just on World War II and that kind of time period in general.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is it an American author and is it in translation? And how do you do this?
So it's an American author. He's taught in Japan for, I think, several decades, kind of fluent in Japanese, but it's not translated. It's written in English, but from an American author who kind of speaks fluent Japanese.
So he was fluent when he interviewed.
Exactly, yes.
Well, and also, it's a little bit in conjunction with our recent Nobel Peace Prize.
Exactly, yes. It was recent Nobel Peace Prize was won by a group of hibakusha who have been kind of protesting against nuclear weapons proliferation for decades now. This book is available now from the Glencoe Library, and I hope you all read it. Thank you.
And our final pick of the day is Book and Dagger, How Scholars and Librarians Became the Unlikely Spies of World War II by Elyse Graham. This historical nonfiction follows the academics who were sent to Europe in World War II to gather intelligence and disrupt the Axis war machine through information asymmetry. Or, as the epigraph sums up with a quote from German statistician Wolfgang Weitbauer, what if all those PhDs stopped just defending and actually start attacking? Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States government lacked a dedicated intelligence agency. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, the precursor to the CIA, was hastily formed and had to scramble for agents. Without any actual spies to recruit, they had to turn to the next best thing: university professors, archivists, and librarians. After all, who is better suited to looking for information, separating the signal from the noise, and explaining their findings than an academic? Additionally, they possess a spy's most valuable trait, the ability to blend in and be completely forgettable. In the words of one official, the ideal spy is someone who would have trouble getting the attention of a waiter. So picture it. In 1942, hundreds of eggheads, men and women alike, were recruited by the OSS, trained at secret spy schools, then sent to places like Istanbul or Stockholm, often under the guise of inspecting and collecting rare books for their collections. Once there, they would engage in bona fide spycraft, setting up listening posts, intercepting communications, liaising with resistance groups, and maybe even carrying out the occasional assassination. I say maybe because a lot of what they did was lost to history or top secret classification. Elyse Graham is forthright whenever she needs to fudge the historical record in service of a good story. Passages detailing what she thinks may have happened are clearly marked, and they crackle. They're up there with the best of spy fiction. If you read lots of World War II history, you have undoubtedly read books about how soldiers, generals, resistance fighters, and even manufacturers and physicists helped turn the tide of the war. In Book and Dagger, the bookworms finally get their due. Graham follows some recurring figures in their efforts to thwart the Axis. She gets into the nitty-gritty of what it's like to be a spy in a hostile country. She shows us how control and manipulation of information are the first step to a battlefield victory. And she also gives us a nice lesson on the virtues of democracy. Totalitarian regimes have no use for intellectuals, Jews, or women in positions of power. So many of these great minds, whom the fascists had no use for, found a welcoming home in the US or Britain, and it was there that they helped to turn the tide of the war. Book and Dagger is the kind of World War II history that we need more of. Fans of World War II histories that are set away from the battlefield, such as Robert Edsel's The Monuments Men or Kai Bird's American Prometheus, will love it. Readers of spy fiction by the likes of John le Carré or Philip Kerr will enjoy the real-world spycraft and the passages of creative nonfiction. Book and Dagger came out last month and is available from the Glencoe Library. And that does it from us today. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.